Thank you. So, yeah, so I will talk to you about a career in lab medicine because that's what I do. I'm a medical microbiologist at BCCDC, and I have my email there if you guys, want to reach out with any questions afterwards. And what I'm planning to do is sort of a very quick overview of lab medicine, sort of what specialties are involved. I will not go into details into all of them because I really only know anything about medical microbiology. Then I'll talk about residency considerations from the medical microbiology point of view, but that would kind of apply to all of the lab medicine subspecialties to some extent. Transition to faculty, some research opportunities in lab medicine, and then I will switch gears and show you sort of a small example of the sort of like mini research projects that we can have going on in medical microbiology. So lab medicine falls into the department of pathology and lab medicine. So pathology is obviously a separate thing, and I will not touch on that at all. For lab medicine, we have biochemistry, hematopathology, medical microbiology, and sort of plus or minus general pathology. The plus or minus is because there aren't always many programs in the country that still accept for general pathology residency. So for biochemistry, it used to be a separate entry stream. Now it's actually a subspecialty of internal medicine, if you ever consider that. So you do 3 years of internal, and then you transition to fellowship in biochemistry. And there are 3 spots in Canada, one in Sherbrooke, one in Montreal, 3 in Quebec, Sherbrooke, Montreal, and McGill, and 1 in BC. Then for hematopathology, that one is a separate entry stream. Unlike many other subspecialty residencies, it's actually only 4 years rather than 5. So if you are looking to really shave a year, that may be something to consider. Both in Alberta, both of them in the University of Alberta, and one in BC. And it includes procedures such as bone marrow biopsies, for example, so it's a bit more of a procedure-driven subspecialty. For medical microbiology, there are 2 ways to get into that. The way that I took was a separate entry stream straight into medical microbiology, and there are, like year to year it varies, but usually anywhere between sort of, like 5 and 9 spots per year that accept for direct entry into medical microbiology. And you can also do it as a subspecialty, sort of combined ID/micro fellowship, again, after internal medicine. And the general build-up of medical microbiology specialty, if you consider that, you do 1 general rotating internship year. So usually it's kind of, adult medicine centers. So you do a lot of internal medicine, general surgery, obstetrics, gynecology, and emergency medicine. I actually do the neurology rotation in my general rotating year. And because largely it's adult focused, we do have currently 1 resident who actually started out as a pediatric resident and then decided that he preferred lab medicine and switched over to medical microbiology. And because he started out in pediatrics, his rotating year was kind of pediatrics heavy and pediatrics focused, but he still was able to transition, not lose a year, so that's also possible. And then interspersed in various combinations throughout the next 4 years, there is 1 year of infectious diseases training, 2 years of medical microbiology training, and 1 year of elective time. And for those electives, you can kind of choose to do some IDs, choose to do some med micro. Some people go away and do training overseas. Some people do like a master's program. So there is a lot of different things that you can take. It's pretty flexible, which is quite nice. Like if you are looking to sort of build in more research in your residency, and if you are looking to sort of do extra training. And if anybody wants to, there are definitely opportunities for further fellowships after you finish your residency. But many people, such as myself, you've already done 7 years of medical school plus 5 years of residency. Not everybody wants to do more fellowships, and that's actually also perfectly fine. I think actually most of medical microbiology residents, once they graduate, they go on to staff positions. If you do fellowships, that is not a common route to take. And general pathology, like I said, not too many places offer it, but it's mostly pathology, but it does provide some, other aspects of lab medicine training and 5-year residency. And I guess, well, now it does look like there are 7 residency programs, but none of them GBC. So for residency considerations, for lab medicine, it's not a very common residency. Like not too many people are exposed to it during medical school. Not too many people know about this as an option. So when you think about it, so for example, if you think about medical microbiology specifically, like for me, I was kind of deciding between infectious diseases and medical microbiology, trying to figure out should I go the internal medicine way and then medical microbiology, or should I, and then infectious diseases, or should I go straight into medical microbiology? So for infectious diseases, you see a lot of sort of bread and butter infections because a lot of patients present with that, and they don't need to be seen, and so that does make up for a large load of the practice. And obviously there will still be some sort of esoteric patients who come in once in a while here and there, and they're very exciting and interesting, and that also happens quite a bit. If you choose to specialize in infectious diseases, for example, if you go to do like additional training in like transplant infectious diseases, then clearly you will see something extremely esoteric almost every day, because that's what transplant people tend to get. But most of the time, it's more sort of a bread and butter, usual kind of infections. And in the medical microbiology, we obviously diagnose usual infections a lot in the lab, but medical microbiologists themselves don't get involved in those cases a whole lot. Mostly we get involved in, sort of in the more interesting esoteric ones, and that was definitely an appeal to me. Like I liked that more than sort of dealing with diabetic feet a lot. Do you like to manage patients more? And that can be very challenging and very interesting in its own right. Choosing the like appropriate therapies, making sure that you actually consider all of like all of the therapeutic options. And so like that's a very exciting thing to do. But like alternatively, do you prefer sort of to focus more on the diagnosis and not see the patient through with the management quite as thoroughly, quite as much? So clearly in lab medicine, you will not be managing patients a whole lot, you will mostly be diagnosing them. There are some management aspects involved present as well. So for example, like if you work in a hospital lab, you will be reviewing all of the sort of clinical finding patients and making sure that they are on appropriate management, and if they are not, then you call the physicians to advise that they should be switched or to something else, or some antibiotics should be added. But mostly it's about diagnostics. Then sort of like what is the setting that you're interested in working? So for example, are you happy to only be sort of interest to anyone in a bigger center, or do you want for your skills to be valuable in a smaller center? Do you want to, for your skills to be valuable internationally, or you're okay for them to be only mostly valuable in North America, for example? So that's something to consider as well. Training environment, number of residents, as you saw, most of these programs are quite small. So, clearly it's quite different from, something like internal medicine, where there are, well, actually I don't know exactly how many, but probably hundreds of residents in a program overall. And lifestyle is also an important consideration. Like we do want to have a life that we are interested in. And then what is what role in healthcare are you interested in having? Do you want to practice medicine more? Do you want to have more of an administrative role? Because in lab medicine, administration is actually quite quite a heavy component of lab medicine, which I didn't realize right away, and that's why I'm mentioning it now. And also what type of consulting do you want to do? So like if there's any subspecialty, you will be consulting for someone. So in clinical medicine, you'll mostly be consulting, for family doctors, or for maybe for like more general, specialists as a subspecialist. In lab medicine, you mostly deal with infectious diseases, doctors with public health, sort of depending on where you are. So for medical microbiology as sort of a subject consideration. So what makes it interesting in my opinion, so for routine diagnostics, pathogens are constantly evolving, so your run-of-the-mill E. coli all of a sudden become more resistant, and you need to figure out how to make sure that you detect these resistant bugs. Technology is evolving, so again, we used to, do a lot of biochemicals to identify pathogens. Now hardly anybody does those anymore. Now we have, lots of other different types of technologies, and they continually, new technologies continually come up, and you have to keep on top of that. And if you have an interest in like that aspect of like medicine or biology, that's definitely a very appealing specialty. And like I already said, for patient management, we don't manage patients, but you do have an opportunity to provide advice to make sure that people who are, perhaps, coming up with some more unusual infectious diseases and maybe they're under care of teams who haven't seen those types of entities before. You make sure that those patients are actually able to be treated. You recommend therapies, you recommend consults, and like diagnostic imaging. So that's also quite interesting. For reference diagnostics, I work in a reference lab, so we don't do routine like blood culture benches or urine benches. We do mostly reference work or public health related work. So for reference work, that will be sort of dealing with emerging pathogens. So like if there is a new type of encephalitis virus that's making its way, we need to make sure that like we are able to figure out how to detect it in in the patient's serum by serology and the patient's CSF by PCR. We need to again think about emerging technologies. So we're sort of moving more and more into the era of personalized medicine. So not only are we trying now to detect the pathogen, but also maybe trying to detect the host response to the pathogen to see how they interact. And like again, that's a big part of what we do in lab medicine, and that's quite an exciting field to be working in, I think. And
can you just elaborate on that? How do you investigate the host interaction with pathogens?
We don't do it routinely, but there are research projects that are looking at like the host like the host cytokine profile, for example, in response to a particular infection, trying to figure out like other particular patterns that can be predictive of a worse response or a better response. Or I mean, it's also, I guess, not so much the host itself, but the host microbiome. Sort of how the host microbiome changes, like when they, when they're pre-bone marrow transplant. There was a big project, going on that at St. Virginia Hospital.
So
that was quite interesting.
Research-based project.
Yeah, so research-based, yeah. Yeah, nothing that's routinely done in that area, yes, yeah. Yes, and then again, if you're working in a hospital setting, infection control is a huge component of medical microbiology. You would be advising on sort of like appropriate protocols of patient isolation. Like what do you need to do before you isolate a patient, before you de-isolate a patient, how to prevent spread of infections. What are the new sort of technological advances that can can help you increase the cleanliness in the environment. For example, at PGH right now they have this. I can't remember the name of the machine, but essentially it's kind of like a portable ultraviolet radiator. So when somebody leaves the hospital room, that room is kind of stripped down to the most bare minimum, and then this machine is brought in and it kind of irradiates the room for a period of time. So if anybody ever works in a biosafety cabinet, how we turn on the UV lights. So it's the same idea, only for a patient room. So again, that's something that you will be involved in. And for public health microbiology, again, that's the kind of setting that I work in. We do a lot of typing of pathogens to help detect outbreaks, to help figure out when the outbreaks start and they end, and help our public health colleagues with outbreak investigations and response. So for the setting, for medical microbiology specifically, there aren't any, I guess, like sort of smaller town settings where you can practice. You do need to be in like relatively bigger size communities. So these here are literally the only places where you would be able to practice as a medical microbiologist in BC. So if you want to live in Nelson, you can't be a medical microbiologist. If you want to, if you want to go up north again, you can be a medical microbiologist. Just, there is just not a job setting for you. So that's something to consider. And similarly, for sort of, like skills transportability, not only will you not be able to practice in a smaller center, you also likely will not be able to be involved as much in, like, say, overseas, work, for example, because, a lot of the times when people go overseas, they go to sort of, like more like remote, underfunded, sort of under-resourced settings. And what we are used to dealing with here is just simply not available there. So, like, I really doubt that I would be able to advise on how to run a lab that doesn't have the equipment that I'm used to having here. So it's kind of, like, it's not a very, like, you'd be transportable to other, high-income countries, but not to low-income settings. Smaller centers are often staffed by general pathologists rather than microbiologists, so then again, that's another kind of creative consideration. And some centers, interestingly, actually some more remote centers, they really like to have dually trained med-micro ID people, because they then like for those people to provide both ID consultations and med-micro oversight. So that's consideration. For training environment, The residency programs are really quite small all across the country. Most of the time it's one, sometimes 2 residents a year. So that has some benefits and some drawbacks. The benefit is that you have a huge staff to residence ratio, and you get a lot of personalized attention, you get a lot of personalized advice. That's great. People take an interest in you. People really want to make sure that you're doing well, that you're progressing as you're expected to progress. So that's all wonderful. I personally didn't have this issue. I really got along very well with everybody in my program, but occasionally people don't get along as well with somebody else in their program. So then you're stuck with the person for the next 5 years in very close quarters. So that may be an issue. So that's again something to consider. Again, due to the small size, you get quite an individualized attention from the program director, and we have wonderful program directors here. And I don't know the current program directors in other programs, but when I was doing my residency tour, I thought all of them actually were really quite great. And in terms of sort of connections to other programs, we have very close connections, very close interactions with adult and pediatric infectious diseases trainees. We share academic hub day, we share rounds, and so that's sort of like our biggest group of people that we do this throughout the residency. For lifestyle, a huge perk for the residency is that there is no in-house call after the first rotating internship year. And I found it to be great because I do have kids, and I found it very useful to be able to take on call from home. You can be salaried, so you can work, you can contract it, and that's kind of country dependent. So it's not so much your personal preference. It's kind of whatever the place where you want to where you want to work does. That's what you're going to be doing. The MedMicro call, the call is mostly lab related and either infection control or public health questions related. So if you work in a hospital, you will be getting a lot of questions about infection control while you're on call. If you work in a public health setting, then you will get more sort of public health, outbreak related type questions when you're on call. Not so much I guess the lifestyle consideration, which is just kind of an interesting tidbit of what you can possibly deal with. And then for travel and conference leaves, because we do work in sort of small groups, you do have to coordinate those, with your colleagues. You need to make sure that somebody stays behind and actually covers the lab. So that does impose some limitations on your travel time, your conference time. Still workable, but just again something to consider. And then for the role in healthcare, in lab medicine, and in general, and specifically in medical microbiology, there is a huge administrative component to what you do, which, like I said, I personally didn't really realize until sort of towards the end of my residency. And if you don't like dealing with procedures, or with policies, or with hospital administrators, or with public health administrators, then might not be the best setting for you, because you do have to do that a lot. I can't say that I love that aspect of the job, but I guess that I don't mind, luckily for me. And I find actually in some respects it can be rewarding to do that, because whatever the outcome of your involvement in these administrative duties is, you do kind of you end up having a bit of a I guess larger impact on the subjects that you're dealing with. And in terms of the oversight of the laboratory, there is definitely medical oversight. That's sort of what you get hired for as a medical microbiologist, but you also do deal with some administrative components of the oversight as well. And depending on your sort of specific role, you will have more or less of the administrative level oversight. And you provide consultations to a wide range of healthcare providers, some primary, mostly specialists, and both inpatient and outpatient-based. For hospital-based microbiologists, mostly inpatient-based. If you do work in a public health or in a community lab, then mostly outpatient-based. Okay. So for transition to faculty, if you know your interests early, and I guess that would be actually kind of true not just for medical microbiology, but in general, that I think that can be both like a great asset and a bit of a hindrance as well. So in terms of an asset, you can focus your projects to your electives to sort of suit your interests and sort of showcase yourself to the people that are found in the places where you want to end up working, and foster those relationships. So that's definitely a good aspect of it. The downside is that if you do maybe too much of that, you kind of become a bit easily pigeonholed. So I knew from the very beginning that I had an interest in public health, and I guess I expressed it often enough that towards the end of my residency, lots of labs just kind of said, well, Ina's going to go into public health. Like, don't even bother, like talking to Ina about any job options because she's going to go into public health. So, that can be kind of a bit of a downside. But it can help develop your area of expertise. And again, if you're looking to build a particular type of practice, then if you develop a particular expertise that's sought after in the area that you're interested in, that's obviously useful to have. It's a small community in lab medicine, so it's very important to build connections and to make good relationships. And I guess medicine in general is not a very large community; it's relatively small. But like a smaller subspecialty is going to be even more so. And I would say that if you are looking to get any extra training, it's much easier to get that during residency than like after you finish your residency, because during residency you have the selective time built in. You have it's an expectation that you're training, that you're exploring your options, and you can take that like half a year off to go and do a course somewhere. Like it's an accepted thing to do. But once you start as faculty, you do get a lot of responsibility related to your specific place of work, and people will not be interested in letting you go and take a course for 6 months because they want you to stay behind and actually do the work that you were hired to do. And also another thing, when you, especially as an MD PhD graduate, if you're interested in continuing your research post-residency, once you transition to faculty and you apply for faculty appointment, make sure that you apply to the appropriate type of faculty appointment, one that allows you to apply for grants. So I know some people who apply for an instructor position, which actually doesn't allow you to hold grants, and they were installed that. Okay. So for research opportunities, so you can do, like in R&D or physician development, so you can do the research, you can do the development. And in lab medicine, I would say that development is probably a bit easier than research because that sort of ties in a bit better and a bit more effortlessly into the routine lab operations. So like if you want to develop a new type of assay, if you want to develop a new screening program, that's, like it's more immediately translatable into actual, clinical impact, so that's a little bit easier to do. But depending on the setting where you work, like there would be different opportunities for both development and research. Being in a lab, you do have access to interesting materials that are sort of, like within your reach, so that can be patient, direct patient specimens, that can be things isolated from those patient specimens. You do need to apply obviously for appropriate permissions to utilize those for both, QI and for research, but, like all of that is doable, and that's, I think, is a great asset of, being in lab medicine. And you do have a lot of collaborative opportunities with other clinicians and basic science researchers, so, you can foster relationships with, in a hospital, say between a lab and like a particular, clinical subspecialty, or between different labs, it's all of those kind of possibilities. You can foster sort of relationships with basic science researchers as well. Like in those relationships, I would say that the basic science researchers would definitely have a stronger role in the actual research that's being carried out. You would be more and more supportive role, because that's what I find for medical microbiology, but it's possible. And when I was finishing, everybody was saying that I was kind of, when I was applying for jobs, people were saying, make sure that you get protected time for research. And reading over, I asked what's the protected time for research. I think it's a bit of a unicorn that people tell you that there is, but there really isn't. Not in lab medicine anyways.
Sorry, say that again.
For protected time, it's just not something that you can like write into a contract that 10% of your time or 20% of your time is going to be protected for research. It's just not something that people get. I mean, you can find time within the day to work on it, but it's not like you're going to say, oh, this week I'm only doing research. That's not going to happen. Okay. So for research opportunities, like I said already, for faculty appointments, you need to apply as an assistant and associate faculty, and usually associate faculty is a much sort of more advanced person, so when you're just applying, it would be an assistant faculty. And you can apply either for a clinical appointment or for like a regular appointment, but it should always be either clinical assistant professor or just an assistant professor, because that's the only way that you can hold your own grants, otherwise you won't be able to. Funding sources can be quite diverse, so like there are hospital foundations, or there is a BCCDC foundation where I work that can, you can apply for some funding from them. There is some potential for industry support in lab medicine because, like a lot of different companies come up with different types of like diagnostic options, and they do want for those to be trialed out, and you can kind of forge those collaborations with them. There are also sort of like all of the regular funding options such as CHR, Genome, BCO Canada, and CERC, so those still obviously exist. And being in lab medicine, you would think that you're in a lab, so like you use your opportunity to use this lab for research, but research lab work is not the same as operational lab work, so you can't actually expect that your lab tech will be working on your research projects. You have to find somebody else to do that, so it's kind of, again, something to think about. And I think that's it for this part. Do you guys have any questions so far before I go on to show you like a little mini project that we did last year?
I think there are some people who are interested in specialty potentially. Any questions specific?
Yeah.
I guess I had a question about how you see the field going forward. I know in Ontario they have a lot of PhDs doing clinical microbiology, and how that plays in with the job opportunities for medically trained microbiologists, and also interplay, I guess, with artificial intelligence and all of these specialties.
So for clean micro versus med micro, there are a few more clean micro training programs southeast, like you mentioned. So there is one in Toronto, there is one in Winnipeg. Now there is also one in University of Calgary, but we don't have any here, and we don't have too many clean micros in BC either. I think clean micros, they generally tend to be more in reference labs and public health labs. So for example, in BCCDC where I work, we do have 4 clinical microbiologists, but that's really the only lab where we have clinical microbiologists. Everywhere else is medical microbiologists who make up the staffing of the micro labs. And mostly, I mean, in clinical microbiology, you do get some ID training, like you do get a clinical component, but you don't get the sort of the whole breadth of medical training that you get as a medical doctor. And I guess depending on what it is your lab is looking for you to do, you just will not be able to provide the same level of consultation as a clinical microbiologist as you can as a medical microbiologist. So, for example, and also like medical legally, for example, you can, as a clinical microbiologist in BC, you cannot be on call. So, like at BCCDC where I work, we only have 3 medical microbiologists, and we are the only people who rotate call, because the 4 clinical microbiologists that we have, they are not eligible to take call because of the medical legal considerations. And I don't think that in Canada, the clinically trained people are going to phase out the medically trained people, because we do contribute to infection control, aspects of it. We do contribute to public health aspects of it. In US, for instance, they have mostly clinical microtype people who run the micro labs, but that's sort of made possible by the fact that they have pathology and AD people who are responsible for infection control and for the actual clinical interface. I don't see it going that way here. For artificial intelligence, that's actually kind of, I think, underutilized in medical microbiology, as compared to pathology. We really just don't use it a whole lot. I mean, I think you can potentially try and figure out how to automate like smear reading, for example. That would be, a very kind of obvious immediate aspect of how to do it, and you can maybe. Yeah, I can't think of a good example right now, but I'm sure that it can and should appeal at some point in time, but it's not something that we are actively dealing with right now.
Well, it sounds like there are possibilities too in personalized medicine and really looking widely for biomarkers and clusters going up and down.
Yeah. Yes, so sort of personalized medicine-wise, the lab that I'm responsible for is the Microbiology Lab. So, for example, like in the field of non-tuberculous mycobacteria, there is a big interest right now in trying to figure out, why is it that some people, get the same bug but some of them are very sick and other ones are not sick at all. And like what is it in the interplay between the host and the pathogen that actually makes that happen? And perhaps in the future, like right now, basically, if somebody gets diagnosed with an NTM, the non-tuberculous mycobacterium, and like it's a bit of a guessing game as to whether or not they should be treated. Is it this particular NTM that's responsible for the progression of their pulmonary disease, or is it maybe their underlying COPD that's actually driving the driving the disease process? In the future, it might be that we will be not just surveying their sputa for the bugs, but also for some cytokines or for some other markers of the disease that will actually help their therapy. So I think that there's definitely that's a bit more active area of research than AI right now. I think AI is research.
I don't think you mentioned it, and maybe some people know, like Boston. Sorry. But in the trains with Brett Finley, so that was sort of
the
so the host pathogen relationship is very important in that lab for sure.
Yes.
Any other questions about this question?
You said that you can't really get technical research time written into a contract in the specialty at all.
In this specialty, maybe not this weekend.
Yeah. And so, like, I guess I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about how you've gone about actually carving out some research time in practice.
Yeah, so I mean, being in a lab, like you're not running around, from patient to patient. So basically, your time is mostly office-based, and you have to divide it between your regular clinical duties. Basically making sure that you deal with the consults that come up, from the lab, dealing with routine lab operations, and anything else that you want to do. So for the anything else that you want to do, like you will inevitably have some demands in your time from like various, like sort of policy improvement projects that come up that are quite necessary from various, like policy-related working groups. But if you're careful about it, and if you know how to say no, then you can also, carve a bit of time for research-related activities. Yeah, that's what I do. Okay. All right. So let me show you a little example of what we did last year. So not all of you have gone through first year of medicine yet, right? How many haven't? Okay. So I'll try and give maybe a little bit more background. What is your background? Undergrad?
I just finished my first year of the MPH program, so.
MPH?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just finished my first year of a master's.
Oh, like in what area? Master's of?
Oh, Microbiology and Immunology.
Okay, okay. Okay.
Just first year undergrad.
Sciences?
Yeah, science one.
That's right. So a big component of microbiology right now is genomics, and basically genomics will be related. We can sequencing the whole genome of the organism, trying to either find how related are the organisms, or what type of virulence structures do they carry, what type of antibiotic resistance genes do they carry. So that's something that's quite up and coming and hot in microbiology now. So this little project was focusing on trying to, with the help of genomics, to sort out the regional outbreak of Neisseria meningitidis serogroup W cases. So, and a good thing about this project, which is actually why I decided to show this one specifically, is it was a really nice collaboration between a whole lot of different people and different labs, and within BC, also outside of BC, and to me it was a really great example of how they all kind of came together to try and figure it out. Because in some labs you had some typing methods available, in other labs you had some detection methods available. NML was doing the whole genome sequencing for us, we were trying to analyze it. So it was a really nice combination of everybody's efforts. And so for Neisseria meningitidis, it's a gram-negative organism that can cause meningitis and sepsis. And here hopefully you can kind of see these little bean-shaped little diplococci that's contained in meningitis. It's divided into serogroups, and that's the primary way of typing the organism. So in Africa, there is something called the meningitis belt that has very regular epidemic outbreaks of AW and X Neisseria meningitis. And in North America, B, C, and Y are the more common types. So how is it typed? Like I already said, the capsular antigens A, B, C, W, Y, and X, they are the ones that determine the serogroup of the organism, and that's the main source of typing. You can also look at sporins, and sporins will give you the serotype and the antigen type, so like that's not the polysaccharide, it's obviously the protein. You can look at something called MLST, which is the multi-locus sequence typing. Basically, you select some regions of the genome, you look at the sequence of those regions, and then gives you a particular pattern, called the MLST pattern. And you can also look at the electrophoresis of housekeeping proteins, so that gives you the electrophoresis type, or the ET type. So many different ways to type this organism. The scheme that we kind of commonly use, so you would get a report back saying this organism is serotype W, then 2A, P1.2, ST11, T37. So it's like this really long kind of mouthful that you then have to figure out how this particular mouthful relates to another mouthful. And when this type, when this typing scheme was introduced, the sort of original paper, I think it was in the early to mid 90s. They said, oh, this is going to be so great, it's going to be so clear, it's going to be so easy to understand, everybody's going to love it. And everybody hated it, ever since it came out until now. So another way to try and type it is by whole genome sequencing, which A will give you a finer resolution, and B will, be maybe a little bit easier potentially to understand than this, complicated long sequence of typing events. So for whole genome sequencing, one thing to know about Neisseria meningitis specifically is that the genomics is very plastic. So there are some microorganisms that don't evolve very much over time. There are some that evolve very much by sort of gaining and losing plasmids. And there are some, such as Neisseria meningitis, that don't just gain and lose plasmids, so they actually just like to exchange whole chunks of genomes back and forth. So for something like serogroup W, ST11, it's called the Hush clone because it was responsible for a huge outbreak following one of the Hush pilgrimages a while ago, 2001 or 2003. Like that particular clone evolved from two serogroups exchanging genetic material and giving rise to this new organism. So why am I worried about serotype W specifically? Because that's the that's the organism that's responsible for our outbreak in BC about a year ago now, and you can see that serotype W can have many different sequence types. That's one of those sort of typing schemes. And in the recent years, sequence type 11 was definitely those red bars. They were increasing in Canada. And together with that, serotype W was also on the rise. So this serotype W sequence, ST11 was definitely sort of taking us like a strong foothold in Canada. And in Okanagan in 2017, in November, there were 3 cases of meningococcal disease detected among adolescents in interior health. And there can be sporadic clustering of cases, but not necessarily in the same age group, not necessarily in the same school. So this, in this case, people were concerned. And then just about a month later, 2 more cases were added, and people actually declared an outbreak and started public health response, such as vaccination and reaching out to contacts, etc. And the problem was that because of the sort of radial rise, it wasn't certain as to exactly which of the cases which were continually popping up, which of those were supposed to be counted together with the outbreak, and also what would be considered the beginning of the outbreak. Would it be like I said, serotype W ST11 was pretty common in general, so just the epidemiologies were hard to explain exactly when what to call the start of the outbreak and when to call it the end of the outbreak. So for trying to investigate this, all the patient specimens that were collected, clinically indicated for the routine investigations, like if the isolates were cultured, they were sent to our lab for initial typing, and then we would forward them on to NML. Some culture negative specimens, so for example, somebody would come up with a syndrome very suggestive of an STM meningitis, but maybe they were given antibiotics before their cerebrospinal fluid was collected. In those cases, the organism might have been dead and not culturable. So those those specimens were sent to the BC Children's Lab in Vancouver that had a PCR specific to Neisseria that was able to identify that Neisseria was there, B, what kind of serotype it was. And like I said, NML, the national lab, was doing further characterization for us. And this is kind of the line list of everything that we had. So initially we only had that sort of like old archaic method of typing those things. So you can see that all of the isolates, they type very much the same. All of them were W, all of them were C11, all of them, for which we had electrophoretic test for AT37, and the antigenic markers were also quite similar. And it was really hard to say, like exactly what to do the end and the beginning of this outbreak. And like I already said, a couple of isolates could not be cultured, so those were just detected by PCR. And for instance, in this case, number 15, so this patient, he was kind of at the end thought to be the patient 0 for this outbreak, and he unfortunately actually passed away, and the organism was detected in his specimens like after the back post-mortem, and was detected by PCR, and even though we had some typing available for it, but it wasn't the full typing spectrum, so that kind of made it particularly difficult. So this was the result of the whole genome sequencing that were made available through NML, and here in this tree, you can see in red here, that was thought to be the outbreak cases. Not all of the cases from the previous table are here because only the cultured isolates could be whole genome sequenced. Anything that wasn't cultured, just there was nothing to sequence. In green here, that's the other GR Health W cases from that year. And then just some random other W cases from BC in general for comparison. And this is the harsh strain that I said was circulating, from early 2000s. So you can see that for cases which were thought to be part of the outbreak, we have these ones here that cluster very, very closely. They are 8 SNPs apart. So SNP is a single nucleotide polymorphism. So basically that's like a distinct regions of the genome that are different from each other. So these ones are 8 SNPs apart. If we include number 6, that also at this point in time is thought to be related epidemiologically. Now we have 13 SNP differences. Now the like the interesting part and the problem part is that for some like an evolving technology such as whole genome sequence, we are able to to sequence them, we are able to put them on a tree. But at this point in time, we actually don't really have any specific guidelines to say that, well, like if there are 8 SNPs apart, they are related, but if they're 13, they're unrelated, or maybe they're still related. Basically, that kind of information is not something that people have really uncovered yet. So we had to, try and figure out, do we call all of this a cluster, or do we call this a cluster? In this case, we're excluding this case, and the outbreak didn't start as early as they thought. Maybe this patient's contacts need to be traced, maybe they don't need to be immunized. So, basically all of this has an implication for public health response. So when we then compare all of the interior health authority cases from 2017, you can see that they actually seem to be more related to this isolation than these cases. So that was our first indication that perhaps case number 6 wasn't actually part of the outbreak. And when we look at the overall, variability of Neisseria meningitis genome, you can see that basically all of these SNPs, 8 or 10 or 13, they are just such an infinitesimal, part of the genome overall that, really all of these are very related. So how do we figure out what's the threshold? So then we decided to look at the positions of the variability. So where exactly, not only how many SNPs apart are they, but which SNPs apart are they. So these here are the ones which are 7 SNPs apart, and you can see that they have very distinct similar patterns of variability. Now this isolate that was thought to potentially be epidemiologically linked, you can see that it really doesn't look very much like those at all. So from all of this investigation, we kind of concluded that likely number 6 wasn't part of the cluster, that outbreak started later than was initially thought, which that I guess was good, that it wasn't going on for as long from the starting point. But interestingly, this case number 16, this case was a baby who visited from the Canada. The baby was from one region of the Canada. He visited another region of the Canada and then came down with Neisseria meningitis meningitis. But because the sort of time frame of the visit was very short, initially it wasn't thought that this baby was actually related to the outbreak. It was thought that maybe his Neisseria meningitis is, even though it's also W, but it's a different W. And so if you go back to this table, you can see that this baby here, he was diagnosed on December 26th. The last case before him was December 7th. So basically, with the time he was diagnosed, officials were just about to declare the outbreak over. And and they thought that, well, a lot of times in the labs there was a very brief interaction with that outbreak region. They were really quite set on not calling this baby part of the outbreak, but whole genome sequencing actually very conclusively demonstrated no, he is part of the outbreak. There is still a circulating strain in the community. We still need to continue with the response. So that actually led to some measurable impacts on public health, which I thought was really great. And another interesting part was that, like I said, for this case number 15, the patient unfortunately was deceased and was diagnosed post-mortem. Because he was diagnosed post-mortem, we didn't have the isolate, we only had the PCR-based detection. We really couldn't say with certainty that he was that, patient 0 in this outbreak. But this baby was a close contact to this patient 0 family, and if you can see, the baby is completely part of the outbreak. That patient 0 was his close contact, and sort of by inference, this that kind of conclusively demonstrated that this case number 15 definitely was involved in the outbreak. So again, that kind of really helped tie the whole thing together, figure out who was in, who was out, and that's helpful. I'm not sure why it's not moving now. Okay. So to conclude, culture-dependent and independent methods were required to uncover all of the outbreak-related cases, to confirm some, to exclude others. The whole genome sequencing helped to delineate the relationship of these strains. From this little exercise, it kind of helped us to hone our method and our technique on how to, sort of which parameters to look at to try and sort out any tissue outbreaks that may potentially arise. And ultimately, both epidemiology and genomic-based information was necessary to understand sort of the full extent of strain clustering. And again, that kind of demonstrated the interconnectedness and interrelatedness of the specialties. So nice little exercise, I guess, for us. Do you get the question from this?